Happy Halloween, everybody. Thank you for coming back. Today we're going to be talking about the Christ mythology. And by that, I by no means imply that Christ was not a real person. I'm going to be talking a little bit more about Jesus specifically in this video. What I mean by the Christ archetype or the Christ mythology is there are a lot of stories. If you're a Christian and you're new or you're old or whatever to this channel, welcome. I'm going to be showcasing to you stuff that you probably might know, along with some hidden details that you may not know. One of the bigger fascinations of the human mind and psyche is the idea of the Christ archetype. And even before Christ's birth, every major culture had some form of mythological story that was very similar to the life of Jesus Christ. Now, there are a lot of people in the New Age, spiritual, occult, esoteric groups today that very falsely say things like Jesus was never a real person and his life was a metaphorical symbolism, which it was. That last part is definitely true. His life and his entire journey was very metaphorical, very cryptic. And I'm going to get into and showcase why that is, what that all really means, how you can apply that to your life, etc. Also getting into the deeper realities of the situation. First and foremost, if you understand a lot about what we do on this channel and how we propose all of our ideas, we kind of go far outside of the woo-woo, nonsensical kind of cultish mentalities, right? Most of the stuff that's being regurgitated from esoteric content creators is all coming from secret societies and books and passages and things like that that have been passed down for hundreds, thousands of years. However, with our advancements in technology, looking at everything from a modern lens, understanding the sciences of it, a lot of people have been turned off from the historical and scientific narrative because they've been so heavily tampered with. Well, I avoid all the crap and the nonsense, and I look at what's real, and then I apply it from a psychological lens. And by psychological, I definitely don't mean what the industry standard of psychology is today, which is basically just memorizing pills. We're talking about the depths of psychology, the Jungian archetypes of psychology. Carl Jung was absolutely by far the greatest psychologist that has existed since psychology was really founded. And psychology is not very old, by the way. If you're looking at it from the industrial lens, psychology has only been around for like less than 100 years, or maybe even a little bit more than 100 years. It probably started its industrial creation around World War I, maybe even a little bit before that, but in the 1800s. But psychology itself is very, very babyish. But Jung was definitely the best, and the reason was because he studied everything. He looked at Kabbalah, he looked at tarot, he studied everything. If you really want to understand Christ, all right, and I'm going to say this as a Christian, also as a reverend minister myself. I run Sunday services through my online school, which I'll show you in a second. But if you really want to get closer to Christ, you really do have to study all of the archetypes, okay? If you want to understand everything on the deepest layer, you have to know what the darkness looks like. You have to know what your objectors are going to be saying. You have to know the secrets of the devil, so to speak, so that you can combat against them. That's like a big proponent of what reaching enlightenment is all about. You have to have experience. And that doesn't mean dabbling in dark stuff. I always tell people, don't do that kind of stuff. Don't dabble in the dark rituals. You don't need to do all this other occult, esoteric nonsense, because a lot of it, you'll start with something that's pretty innocent and simple, like buying crystals and stuff like that. I've bought in a lot of crystals over my lifetime. Doing the meditations, affirmations, all of that's like relatively fine, but you can't rely on that kind of stuff. Again, this is about the story of the expression of the self. This is the story of humanity, and it's found ever present in every single culture. So when you can start with like the little things, but eventually they're gonna, if you're not careful, you're gonna end up going far down rabbit holes that you don't need to go down. Next thing you know, people are telling you got to talk to aliens. You've got to do all this other wacky kind of nonsense. It's about you and your soul's expressive journey through your thoughts, feelings, and actions to become whole again. Okay, we are thrown into this world to be ripped apart, and then we become whole. And if you can do that in your wise journey in this lifetime, which takes a lot of repetition, it takes a lot of practice, but if you can work towards becoming whole, then you can ascend through the middle path, through the frequency of Christ, through the frequency of God, back up into the source, which would be basically be heaven, or nirvana, or whatever you want to call it. But this is cross-referential, guys. Like, you have to understand, the word for it today would be omanism or syncretism. If you've ever heard of Santos Bonacci, he's pretty cool. I think he just got his YouTube account back, but even still, there are a lot of things that I disagree with Bonacci. There are ways that I can respect the man and also disagree with him on certain things, because again, I'm looking at everything from a practical, pragmatic, and psychological lens. If it does not fit within the mold of being useful and helpful, and it's instead going to be harming, then it's not necessary. That's kind of the overall standpoint that I use, because everything is about simplicity. We have so much experience and so much chaos in the world. We gain a lot of experience through our five senses, and then we have to reapply that back to the simplicity, which is essentially our soul, connecting everything back into the unity of the soul. So this is just kind of a roadmap. As you can see, you've got like the 12 zodiacal systems here. And it's a wave all throughout the body. It's very similar to the shape of the spinal column, in fact. And you might be asking, well, what does it have to do with Jesus? Well, it actually has a lot to do with Jesus. There are reasons why we celebrate Christmas on December 25th, even though there's a lot of historical data that assumes that Jesus may not have actually been born around that time. He might have been born around other times of the year. And there's also other reasons why we celebrate Easter the way that we do. Pentecost, it occurs when it does. A lot of these are built off of astrological placements, and a lot of people correctly assume that modern Christianity today pulls a lot from paganism. Even if you're a Christian celebrating with the Christmas tree and all that, that's not a Christian thing. I mean, it's very obvious. They don't have pine trees out in that area of the world, in the Middle East, in the desert. They don't have pine trees out in the desert, right? That's a very Nordic pagan idea. A lot of the stuff that we do around these times come from a blend of different cultures. So if you're looking at everything from that lens, then you're already starting off poorly here. Real quick, I just do want to say, I'm going to showcase this a little bit later. I do have an online university if you're interested in learning more, and I do have an AI tool which just developed the mobile app for it, which you can download off of the website. Okay, so I'll showcase that a little bit later. I've got books, I've got courses. You can come work with me in a one-on-one setting, but we'll get into kind of like the sticks of it right now, and I'll give you guys the details, and then later on you guys can listen to my plug. So what we're really talking about here is not just Jesus the person. We're talking about what Carl Jung in Jungian psychology would call the Christ archetype. Okay, now what do I mean by Christ archetype? Well, first and foremost, it's not exclusive to just Christianity. Okay, the Christ archetype is found in pretty much every major mythological, religious culture, spiritual culture that has existed predating Christ. Okay, so if you're somebody who's taking everything from either a Christian lens, or maybe you're way down the rabbit hole and you understand a lot of the esoteric symbological concepts, then basically what I can advise, okay, is to be a little bit open-minded here, because what you're going to realize, and a lot of you probably already know this already, but I promise you're going to learn a lot more in this video than you probably normally already do know. Excuse me. That in every major culture predating Christ, they have a story of somebody who's similar to Christ. That is very interesting. Okay, that's very, very interesting, because how can you embody the energy of Christ before his physical body existed? Well, it's because his energy existed, if you want to think of it that way. The idea of the Christ predated the man himself. Okay, that's how legendary this guy was. He's undefeated all throughout history. He's the most famous human being that ever existed and walked the face of the planet. Everybody knows Jesus. Everybody, pretty much, in the whole world knows who Jesus Christ is. He's the most popular human figure that's ever existed. And he came out of the Middle East. All right. So how is that even possible that you have people like Osiris, Dionysus, Mithras, Neja, Quetzalcoatl, Krishna, Balder, and plenty of other figures? Those are going to be some of the ones that we go over today, which adopt the Christ narrative. And the reason is because it's built into us inherently, right? Sacred secretion, inner alchemy. This is a process that has existed with humanity as far as spurring our evolution since forever. And this is in fact why Quetzalcoatl, for example, which is the feathered serpent of the Mesoamerican peoples, also called Kukulkan and other names, he, being a serpent, is also very similar to the serpent in the garden, right? Because if you've studied Gnosticism, if you've read Paradise Lost, if you understand what the Catholic Church actually believes happens in that entire story, the real truth is that the serpent wasn't really a bad guy. The serpent was not even really a good guy. The serpent just existed. And the serpent was like, hey, and the serpent told the truth. It said, hey, if you eat this fruit, you're not going to die like Yahweh says, because Yahweh is the demiurge. And so Eve, knows inherently that the snake is not lying. And the snake is really just this. It's the understanding of the energy, okay? Because the energy is very, very important. Sorry about that. I I had some coffee this morning and it went down the wrong pipe and I'm still recovering from it. So the serpent itself is really more synonymous with energy. Okay, energy itself is the main arbiter. Think Moses. All right, Moses has the brazen serpent on his staff. Moses was considered a very positive figure in Judeo-Christian faith, and Moses himself, with the serpent on the staff, the serpent's calm, brazen, bold, stoic, not really moving, not really chaotic. But all the other people, the snakes fall out of the sky and bite them, right? That's not God sending literal physical snakes. That's not how that story's supposed to be interpreted. Remember, God is both physical and metaphysical, so you've got to look at everything from that kind of a lens. Physically, it's describing snakes. Metaphysically, we're talking about energy. The Israelites were angsty, babies. They were wandering the desert. They were pissed off. They were cursing at God, right? They started to lose their faith, so the snakes started to come bite them. And Moses was like, my faith is secure. You guys have no faith. That's why I'm not getting bit. And that's kind of the whole analogy here, okay? Snake is neither good nor evil. Snake just exists, just like energy exists. So let's get into it a little bit here, because I want to talk about the psychology and I want to talk about the storytelling. And I'm going to kind of give you guys, I'm assuming a lot of you guys know these stories already, but if you don't, there's plenty of other videos that I have on my channel. We did a few videos a year back on the depths of the mysticism on each one of these characters. So I'm going to give you guys a glossing overview with a few points here. But ultimately, this entire video is just kind of to wet the beak, so to speak, on getting inundated with the idea that of what the Christ archetype itself actually is. So in Egyptian mythology, you've got these four major characters. Horus eventually becomes Ra, or Re, as it's often called. It's called Ra often, but most of the time I believe it's supposed to be pronounced Re. Osiris, Isis, Horus, and Seth. Okay, and then Horus becomes Ra. All right, and these are basically your four cardinal directions. All right, and it's also the four stages of life and death, the four phases of the moon. And here's one idea of it. Now, there's also Atum, like autumn, and that represents the west. All right, Horus represents the rising sun. Until he becomes Ra, a lot of the time they'll put Isis up here, the mother. Osiris, the father's on the bottom, and then Seth, the evil uncle, which then eventually is slain and defeated, and then is replaced by Atum, the man, basically, is put here on the western front. Now, why? Well, obviously they were sun-worshipping deities most of the time. Horus is kind of the the child archetype. Okay, this is the child version of Jesus, if you want to think of it that way. Full of potential, brimming with potential. The sun rises on the eastern horizon, and it's got nothing but all day to look forward to. Eventually, once Horus defeats its counterpart here, which would be the Venetian Saturnian Seth, right? Which is a very analogous with, sunset. First of all, you got the Horos zone, the horizon, as the name implies, and then Ra or Ray, like ray of sunshine. So the sun rises in the east and sets in the west. Osiris is the fallen king who dies, and then the mother, Isis, has to go and find all. She comes down, right? Like she goes down into the underworld. So Isis is actually what is ruling over the peak of the sun until Ra takes it over. That's a big thing that not a lot of people know. And it's a story of evolution, really. It's a family story of evolution and change, just like your own family. But really, it's also a story of the sun. It's also a story of life. You start off brimming with potential, you reach adulthood, but eventually that sun's got to set, right? Like, no pun intended. And so eventually when the sun sets, you either turn dark, like Seth, the evil king, who slayed his brother and, basically chopped him up into a whole bunch of different parts, which you're going to see that is a very similar iconography in many such cases. Isis impregnates herself with Osiris's penis, his phallus, right? Which is like very crude. It's like, what? Why? Why are you using a cut off limb, from this guy to essentially impregnate yourself? Well, really, what it is it's a part, right? It's a part which represents a microcosmic aspect of Osiris. It's able to give life to the mother. So the father might be dead, so to speak, or the father might be dormant, sleeping, but the mother, who rules the universe, right? Isis rules the universe. Sirius is the star in Cancer, which is also called Isis. And Osiris here, he would be more similar to Capricorn, right? Because he's dead. Right, he's in the dead space, and then Horus eventually rises, defeats his uncle, and becomes the awakened king. And this is again a story which is very similar to the Christ motif, but it's broken down and it's segregated into different parts because it's a different culture at a different time. Right, so Osiris is slain, dismembered, and resurrected by Isis. His death during the Nile's ebb and resurrection during its flood mirrors agricultural and cosmic rebirths. And early Christian theology probably absorbed the Osirian imagery. Osiris was often called the Lord of Eternity. Okay, so you've got God, dormant, right, sending his son to go conquer evil. But here's another big thing. Autumn comes from Atum, which is Adam. Just like we have little Adams, but also Adam and Eve. So really what the Western front, opposite of Horus, the child of potential, represents as humanity. So it's almost like the gods working against the humans. And you're actually going to see a lot of that kind of iconography as we kind of go along here. Next on the list would be Dionysus from the Greek. Okay, he's another one. Long story short, Greek mythology is very deep, and it's also very Gnostic. There was one user, one person commented, really cool outline. I'll give you guys the very brief breakdown. I think his name started with a J, so shout out to you. You were cool. But basically, in the Greek myth, Zeus, is not God. Zeus is the demiurgical creator. There's multiple phases to this, but basically, there is a one general creator, and his name starts with a PH. I think it's like Phanes or Phanes or however you would pronounce it. But basically, you've got multiple different levels and hierarchies of worlds getting created, right? You've got Gaia. You've got the Phanes guy that I mentioned, and basically, as these things are creating these other things, this thing creates this thing creates this, and then eventually Kronos is created, and then he eats all his kids, except his wife betrays him, and then she saves Zeus, and then Zeus kills his dad. And again, this is about a hierarchical story of control, and it's a hierarchical story of creation. But eventually, Zeus ends up with his son Dionysus, and Dionysus in this case is our Christic figure. Why? Because there are 12 titans, and the 12 titans are also symbological with the 12 where are they? Yeah, the 12 deities. Okay, if you consider Mercury as hermaphroditic, which you should because he's Hermes, so basically he's got no gender. So if you want, you could count him as female. There's 6 females and 6 males, right? Again, count Mercury as androgynous or even female. You could. You could also probably even consider Dionysus, because he's really the epitome of mankind, in a psychological archetypal way. But there's 12 zodiac signs. There's 12 cranial nerves in your brain, and there's 12 ribs. So the 12 titans, okay, are on the top, and then the 12 gods are on the bottom. And that's why there's always there's 12 families, which led to the 12 tribes of Israel. That's why you always see 12 going into 12 when you look at these myths. A lot of it is because it is going off of the fact that you have 12 cranial nerves up here, but you also have 12 ribs, and these two worlds, so to speak, are segregated. So what happens is Dionysus, all right, Zeus, he creates Dionysus, and Dionysus has been lied about, they on purpose. Okay, so a lot of people believe Bacchus, Dionysus. Bacchus was his Roman name. They believe him to be basically a drunkard, right? Revelry, partying, right? He's the god of a good time. That's actually not true. The reason he's the god of wine is very similar to why Jesus is associated with wine. It's because it has to do with the life essence of all things. And yeah, he's often depicted as a drunk and a party animal and blah, blah, blah. But that's only because there were Bacchic rites, okay? So there were Bacchic secret societies in Rome, in Greece, Dionysian secret societies, Orpheic, okay? Orpheus was kind of this Christ-like figure in Greece mythology. A lot of the time, Orpheus and Dionysus are associated very similarly with each other. Orpheus is like the man version that becomes the Christ, whereas Dionysus is like the God version that becomes the Christ. And all of these secret societies held the deeper truths, which was basically that these figures were the ones who would ultimately save humanity. So what happens is Dionysus, and there's a lot of different accounts. Some say that when he's a baby, or some when he's an adult man. A lot of the art imagery is when he's an adult man. Basically, he's betrayed by his family, and Zeus throws him up into heaven to be torn apart by the 12 titans, and then Zeus kills the 12 titans, and from that humanity is born. But Dionysus is actually a reincarnation of the original creator, right? So again, let's walk through this. Zeus is known as the demiurgical creator. He's really not that good. He does some good stuff. Let's not get that confused. But he's more feared than anything because he's kind of an asshole. And Zeus ultimately takes his child, all right? So Zeus births this deity, all right, who is actually a reincarnation of Zeus's great-grandfather, who's the real god of all things, right? And Zeus is just kind of the god of the world. All right, so it's like you've got God and the devil, if you want to think of it that way. The devil is really the one who births all of humanity in the physical form. So don't get that twisted either, because that's a big part of the biblical canon as well, where it's Yahweh, right? Yahweh is the creator of humanity. Yahweh is the one that sticks Adam and Eve in the garden. Yahweh is the demiurge. Yahweh is not really the devil, so to speak, but it's kind of a devilish figure. You want to think of it that way? And so Zeus, this demiurgical figure, takes one of his children, his most special children, throws it up into the heavens for it to be torn apart by the 12 titans, okay, the 12 energies, so to speak, and is ripped to shreds and then digested and eaten, okay, by these titans. And then Zeus slays the titans, and the birth of the awakened human is born. Right, so it's kind of like this very, again, Christic story of human sacrifice in order to achieve a greater transcendence. Okay, so very complex, very complicated, but we see often, just like how Jesus is really persecuted, we see Dionysus very heavily persecuted. Like here is a great example. Or here, he's carted around. He's got the grape staff, often with a pine cone on the top of the staff, and he's given that staff by his father because his father recognizes that there's no way he'd be able to really go against him, which is why he sacrifices him. And Dionysus sacrifices himself in order for all of humanity to continue to prosper and live. So again, another very similar Christic figure. Another figure we have is Mithras. So Mithras here. Yeah, here we go. Mithras is He's born from a rock, which you're going to see a lot of analogies for, because born from a rock, honestly, a lot of figures have this, or like they're like a stone is birthed from them, either or. It's the philosopher's stone, which is really an analogy for pure material, physical potential. So the stone, if you want to think of it that way, like have you guys are probably, some of you in the older crowd, Pink Floyd, right? Dragged down by the stone. The Rolling Stones, right? Why are they always singing about stones and rocks and stuff like that? That has to deal with your sacrum bone, your sacral bone in the body. But in the metaphysical, metaphorical sense, the rock or the stone represents the foundation of all things, the cornerstone that the builders rejected in both in the Bible and Freemasonry. Jesus is referred to that, the cornerstone that the builders rejected. Well, think about that real hard. You have a Trinity, Father, Son, Holy Spirit, right? With the Son initially being this demiurgical figure, not Jesus, okay? And then the cornerstone, corner, as in there's four corners, right? In a square block. And a square is a box that you're put in, like a house or a prison cell or anything else. And the cornerstone that the builders rejected is an analogy for the fact that it's a pyramidal shape as a trinity, and you add the fourth corner, and it's rejected by the upper three, okay, because it's human. So in other words, there is a lower dimension to creation that balances out the Trinity, and that's us, right? Father, Son, Holy Spirit. You could say that the Son has to do with us as well, but in reality, it creates a square, which is why we're trapped in a body. We're trapped in a body, we're trapped on the earth, we're trapped here, and it's not like it's necessarily a bad thing. It's not supposed to be so dramatically negative. But back in the day when they were making all these mythologies and life was a lot harder, you better believe that these people were a lot more negative and crazy. They were also, the best of them were a lot more positive. So Mithras is another one that heavily predates Christ. You're talking Persia, Rome, born from a rock. So once again, human, material, right? Like this is in the lower world, the lower realm of all existence. He's celebrated heavily with shepherds, and he's associated around that December 25th timeline as well. What he does is he's got the band of the zodiac, the band of the stars up here, right? All the heavens above him. And you've got the little dog, okay, which represents evolution. It represents the moon. It represents humanity. And Mithras, which represents the sun, is slaying the bull, which represents the moon. It also represents Taurus, because this story came out around the time where they went from the age of Taurus into the age of Aries celestially. Okay, so there's a lot of deep, rich symbolism here. There's a reason why there's a bull and a lamb watching Jesus be born. It's because he birthed the start of the age of Pisces. They were the age of Aries and the age of Taurus, which were witnessing, they were building up to and witnessing the birth of the messianic figure, the anointed one. So Mithras is a predating Christ-like figure of anointment. That's why this guy's holding a torch, because it's to symbolize that Mithras is a Christic figure. You see how this guy's torch is upside down and it's burnt? Like, nobody would hold a torch like this. He's got like grapes in his pocket or whatever. This is supposed to showcase to you that this way, the old way, Moloch, right? The Taurus in the deeper rooted astrological symbolism from the past. You'll see, like, for example, where's this guy? Well, okay, he's got like cheetahs. I didn't even know that was like a big deal back then. But normally you'll see bulls, right? Like Apis the bull. I don't think I have any other pictures here. Apis the bull of the Egyptian mythology. He's like that's like a big precursing element that has to deal with the age of Taurus. And you'll see a lot of bull figures, right? Like, I'm pretty sure the story of Mithras, I think it predates the story of the Minotaur, but the story of the Minotaur in Greek about going through, I think it's Perseus, or it's one of them. They go through the maze and they have to slay the Minotaur. That's actually symbolical with the sign of Taurus itself, because Taurus rules over the lower mind, which is the subconscious, which is essentially a scattered maze. And when you see characters or heroes ever have to go through a maze at any point in their journey, that's actually indicative of, normally they'll put that maze like right before one of the bigger ending points of their journey. The maze comes like shortly before or like it's never like right at the beginning of the story. And if it is at the beginning of the story, it has to deal with going into the abyss, going into the fear. Think Harry Potter, where he's in that maze in the Goblet of Fire, and that's the beginning of the end, right? Because that's when Voldemort, just sorry to spoil it, the spoilers for Harry Potter. That's where Voldemort comes back to life. Okay, he goes through that maze with his friends, and some of them, one of them dies. Cedric Diggory or whatever dies, and that's the sacrifice, right? So he goes through that maze. It's the last thing at the very end of the Goblet of Fire trial, and then he right at the end of the maze is the biggest fear that he could have ever thought of, which is Voldemort. So slaying the bull is like antiquated with slaying the fears. This was used as a symbolical figure back in the day to represent like the man who would do anything to progress humanity and evolve humanity, and that's actually a big key theme here. And so here's like another one. You can see Mithras is slaying the bull. Here's the dog licking at the nape of the neck. Here's a serpent who is also ready to eat some of the meat of the bull. And again, so dog has to deal with the moon, has to deal with evolution, all right? Snake has to deal with evolution. The bull is dying. It's the old way of doing things. It's stubborn, it's unruly. But the man with the celestial cloak, right? He sees the face of God here. All right, and he goes in and he slays, and here's like a mercurial figure with the wings. It's like an angel. So there's a lot of symbology here, which is essentially that the Christ archetype represents evolution itself, which is exactly what Jesus' life and death represented on a physical layer. He died so that he could create a super highway spiritually to connect and bridge heaven on earth, heaven to earth. So it's a deeply rooted evolutionary story. Here's another beautiful imagery here with the serpent and the dog. It's like, why the serpent and the dog? Look, you even got a little crustacean down here that's suckling at the teat of the bull. Crustacean also has to deal with the moon. So the moon has to deal with evolution. And that's exactly what this is, because Mithras on the top here, he has to deal with the sun. So this is the sun slaying. Also, the moon is also exalted in Taurus. So this is the sun slaying the moon. What does that mean? When the sun and the moon come together, it's the eclipse. It's the energy of evolution and humanity on the highest peak, which is why eclipse seasons are the hardest for people to go through. And what we're seeing with this is essentially, at that time, it was humanity's nod to saying we are going to evolve. We are going to leave behind the ways of the past, and we're going to move forward. Quetzalcoatl, okay, Kukulkan. He was the rainbow feathered serpent, and this is a figure which is very highly symbolical with Kundalini, which is on the complete opposite side of the world. How is that even possible? Well, because this has to deal with the energy of all things, right? In Nordic pantheon, you have the Ouroboros, or not the Ouroboros. I'm sorry. The what the hell is the big serpent's name? It's the world serpent. I forget its name, but it's the world serpent. And that is also very similar to Quetzalcoatl, Kukulkan. It's similar to the Kundalini energy within the body. It has to deal with, anatomically, this is dealing with all the ganglions wrapped around the spinal column, okay? The serpent around the tree, right? And that's often what you'll see, and there's big depictions with that all everywhere, right? Like you have the world tree and you have the world serpent in Nordic mythology, but you get it everywhere. And so basically, Kukulkan, Quetzalcoatl sacrifices himself again, right? He's a symbol of wisdom, renewal, and the cyclical fall and return of divine consciousness, and he sacrifices himself to create all of humanity, right? So again, this is like a story of a redeemer, right? And Christ came out of Bethlehem, born in a manger. So again, all of these stories are often, if they're not born as gods in luxury in some way, they're often depicted as like these redeemable characters, because this is about finding the self. So you've got your own inner snake, no matter, and this is why people will become snakes if they ignore that, right? Like you've met snakes in your life, you've met serpent people, you've met evil people in your life. And the reason why is because if you don't take priority to take good care of yourself from within, psychologically speaking, then you basically turn into a snake. Krishna is another figure that is very, very similar here as well. Divine incarnation who descends to restore cosmic order, born under tyrannical rule, performed miracles, offered compassion and self-sacrifice. And his message from the Bhagavad Gita is detachment, surrender, and unity with the divine self, which is very similar to the Christ message as well. So Krishna, which also sounds very similar to Christ, Krishna was a reincarnation of the spirit Vishnu. Vishnu is the son of Brahman. So Brahman's like the major god deity, Vishnu is the sun deity, and Krishna was a human figure that was born from a virgin, and all of the other things very similar to Christ. And just because it's a different culture doesn't make it, less true. By the way, why do they have blue skin? It's because they're very big on the chakras and they're very big on skin tones and colors. And it's very simple. Gods would come from the sky. The spirit of God would come from the sky. The sky is blue. That's like the easiest way to explain it, if you want to think of it that way. Gods would come from the sky and the sky is blue. So gods would probably be blue skinned, and that's why they make them this way. So another one is Balder. Okay, Balder of the Nordic pantheon as well. He is sacrificed in a very similar way. God of light, innocence. He's slain unjustly by his dark brother Loki, destined to return after Ragnarok or the apocalypse. Okay, so he dies and then he's destined to return when Ragnarok, the end times, comes about. His death signifies the loss of divine purity and the hope of future redemption. So again, another figure which is slain unjustly, right? Just like Jesus. In Chinese mythology, you have Nezha. This is going to be the last one I'll talk about, and then we'll get into the psychology of it a little bit here. But Nezha is the prince which is born of a king, and this is Chinese. Right. You could also look at Sun Wukong, the Monkey King, because he's also got a very similar story of persecution. But he's also kind of a devilish figure. He represents more of, again, that lower humanity reflection of the Christ, like the Redeemer, the idea that you have to do a lot of good deeds, even if you're bad, in order to attain Buddhahood or perfection or the Christ consciousness. Nezha is the one on the higher spectrum. So Nezha is actually considered to be a demon, right? Like Nezha is born, and the world basically rejects him, which is exactly what happens to Jesus Christ. The world rejects Jesus and kills him, right? But they've made like movies about this, right? It's like I think this is like the #1 film in China, and again, it's because you can't get away from that Christ archetype. So basically, he's a demon and nobody understands him, and blah blah blah. He's like a demon child, right? Like the world hates him or whatever. But through his good actions and good deeds, he has a change of heart and he changes. He goes to the bottom of the ocean. He kills Ao Kuang, which is again a dragon serpent deity. He is then killed as well by the dragon, and then he is reborn in a lotus petal, of course the lotus being the pineal gland. So essentially the physical body dies away, but the spiritual body is reborn and continues to prosper. And not only does that, but protects and guides humanity. So even though it's a very weirder, darker tale from the Chinese, it's, again, the major themes are still there. Now, what does this mean from a psychological aspect, right? Because that's kind of like the whole point of what we're talking about. So the psychology of it, Carl Jung saw the Christ figure as an expression of the self archetype, okay? So the union of opposites and the realization of divine wholeness from within. Myths of death and rebirth reflect the psyche's own individuation process, the ego's surrender to the transcendent self, all right? What does that mean? Everything in your life is a battle. You are supposed to go through the darker folds of this world so that you can learn about who you really are. And when you do that, as you're awakening to who you really are and you're going forth with the inner alchemical process, with a lot of the stuff that we teach on this channel, and you go forward with these ideas in mind, you begin to become the Christ in and of itself for yourself. What does that mean? It doesn't mean you're going to die. No. The Christ archetype is about self-sacrifice for the betterment of the whole. All right. That doesn't mean that you, that doesn't mean that you can't pay your bills and stuff like that. Like, you have to pay bills, you have to work, you have to do stuff like very similar in all that idea in that headspace. But what it really truly embodies from a psychological perspective is doing away with and shedding away the light, okay, part of the light of your soul that no longer serves you. So your soul, okay, which is the energy that is created from your brain and your heart coherence, all right, that's what your soul is. It's basically your heartbeat, but your brain also beats in relation to your heart. So your brain and your heart are constantly sharing information with each other, as well as the rest of your body. Okay, so the rest of your body neurologically taps into this light field called your neural system, and light can house information. So it only gets rid of that information through massive transformation and change. So if you have parts of you that you've adopted from the outside world that do not serve you and are not you, basically you either seek trauma, or you put yourself into a depression, or you become an alcoholic, whatever. It's all your own choice of self-sacrifice, so you can kill away parts of you. But the reality is that a lot of the time that just ends up stripping and killing off parts of the person's soul about who they really are. And in this life, you can do that. You come in with a very specific energy as a child, and then through external traumas and negative things, but a lot of the time it's our own choices, you actually change and shift the frequency and the information stored within your soul. And now here's the cool thing about quantum mechanics is, if it existed once, you can always find it again. It just takes a lot of very deep searching. Okay, and this is exactly why you have tales like Ebenezer Scrooge. Let's take him for example, right? You guys know that story. Basically, old, rich, nasty, spoiled guy, right? And he's very greedy and selfish. And through a lot of going back through his inner past, looking at the present, looking at the future, he changes his soul and becomes a better person. All right, so it's very similar to that story. What Christ, the person, represented in his story was God doing that through our physical reality. So Christ came as a human form, which a lot of people get upset about, but Christ came as a human form in order for God to strip away the things that we no longer need in our world. And that's exactly really what Christ did. We killed him, and then basically we felt bad. The whole world has felt bad about it, whether they want to admit it or not, for the last 2,000 years. In fact, we're still fighting wars over this. So the whole reality is that this idea of the Christ itself represents the sacrifice that is necessary in order to prolong and keep evolution at its highest peak. And that's exactly what you see in all these stories. So at the end of the day, what Christ lived and died for was for us as human beings to evolve with our Creator, with God, the real Creator, and our mother too. That's another big part of it. That's why he was with his mom all the time. You don't see him talking about Joseph a lot in the Bible. He really does. Like, there's not a lot about Joseph compared to Mary. And that's because it's about God the Father, and it's about the spiritual mother as well. Mother Mary represented the spiritual mother. You could call it Asherah or Sophia or whatever you want to call it. But a lot of these figures that have to deal with that motherly energy have to deal with our divine mother, which is a very big thing in the biblical and Jewish narrative. So there's that. And then there's also the fact that Christ represents you as a human being. We are all our own saviors, right? Like, nobody outside of you is going to save you. Even if you're a Christian and you believe that the apocalypse, Jesus is going to come down from a cloud, he's only going to save the people who are quote unquote worthy, who deserved that level of being saved. And that means that that's based upon the choices that you make. So in reality, Christ isn't going to save anybody, because faith alone is not what's going to get you into the kingdom of heaven, and that is very easily proven in the Bible. And if you actually read the legitimate passages and you don't just take what your pastor told you, faith alone is not enough. Faith alone will get you absolutely nowhere. You have to have faith. That's a big part of it. But you also have to have the faith has to steer your thoughts, feelings, and actions. We all know the fake Christians. We all know the people who waste their time. They go to church and they're still doing all the bad stuff that they shouldn't be doing. Faith alone is never enough. You have to go forth with all of it, because if you want to get into the kingdom of all things, you have to become your own kingdom of all things. You have to create heaven on earth for yourself and resonate with the frequency of heaven in order to obtain it and get there. All right? God does not want your garbage. And that's why heaven is pristine and it's perfect and it's clean and it's everything. Because God is not going to allow anything dirty up there. If you're going to be dirty, you're going to waste more time down here. And yeah, reincarnation is real. It's biblical. It's in the Jewish mysticism. It's in Islamic mysticism. And it's definitely in Christian mysticism when they come to Jesus and they say, aren't you Moses? Aren't you Abraham? Aren't you Jacob? Aren't you Esau? And he's like, I am all those people. That's right. I was all those people. And he's saying that symbolically. He's saying that energetically. Like, we are all one from the source of God. Okay, so this is just a story that we keep repeating, keep retelling to ourselves over and over and over again. You have the people that get it and the people that don't get it. So ultimately, the true secret of faith is that you have to have faith in yourself. You are sent here, scattered, torn apart, so that you can put yourself back together and save yourself, and by doing so, you save humanity. Because if we can shift all of our frequencies individually, we can shift the frequency of the earth, and we can save the earth, and we can save society. And that's the whole point of it. That's why Carl Jung was all about individuation. Carl Jung was a Christian mystic, but he wasn't like, yeah, you just have to give yourself up to Jesus and feel bad about yourself and come every Sunday and eat a cracker. And I'm not putting down the church. I love really good churches, but it's so much more deeply symbolical than that. And you have people who literally believe they eat a cracker and it turns into flesh of their 2,000-year dead Messiah. Like, it's about the frequency. It's about the energy. It's not about the ritual, okay? The ritual is important if it's going to feed the faith and the frequency. But a lot of the time it doesn't for a lot of those people. And they're going to live in ignorance and they're going to squander the rest of their lives, unfortunately. And yeah, I believe that you can get into heaven just by being a good person and keeping it simple. I always talk about that. But the reality is that there's a dark hold over all of these institutions that want to pretend like they keep it simple, but they never do, and it's always about money and stuff. So speaking about money, time to be a hypocrite. I am going to showcase a little bit here before I let you guys go. Please consider going and checking out Psycosmos Online University. We have 59 people. We've got tons of classroom things, including a Bible study masterclass and a couple of other really great ones as well. A lot of people are really enjoying it. If that doesn't interest you, I do have an AI tool which helps you track your inner alchemy process. It helps you walk you through your astrology for the day. Oh, it looks like it's going to log me out. It walks you through the astrology of the day. It gives you all the great information that you could ever need. Yep, there we go. And it gives you a breakdown of what you should be doing during those times of every single month. Comes with that calendar. It comes with the daily planner, which you saw just a second ago. It's got to reload just because it logged me out and logged me back in. But if any of those interest you, I've got prices listed on all the websites. You can come check out the Astraya tool. It's now on the mobile app as well. I have books. I have online courses on Udemy. I've got it all, guys. So if any of this stuff interests you, please go check it out. I love each and every single one of you guys. Thank you so much for watching my video today. And as always, stay safe, stay humble, stay filled with love, and I will see you in tomorrow's video. Drop a comment down below what it is that you'd like to see. Happy Halloween. Love you guys. See you soon.